Hi everyone, my name is Natalie. Today I wanted to do a chatty currently reading video, partly because I feel like sometimes with wrap-ups and everything they are so structured that I don't get a chance to just sit down and casually chat with you, and also partly because I'm in the middle of so many books at the moment. The currently reading pile has been piling up, to say the least, and it's getting to the point that it's a bit ridiculous. So this video is also me trying to sort of keep track of what I'm actually reading and to prioritize what I'm reading so that I read a few of these more actively to finish some of them off. In general, I feel like April has been, in terms of the reading pace, I'm reading about the same pace as in March, but my mind has definitely been more scattered in the sense that I'm reading, I'm spreading my time with reading over many more books. So I'm going to talk about the books that I'm currently reading, but I wanted to briefly show you that finally the sweater that I started for, I don't know if I started it, but I only made tiny progress before Victober last year, and this was the sweater that I was working on in connection with Knit and Listen for Victober, when we were listening to On a Tower by Thomas Hardy. But this I was just finished with this last week, I think, and I showed a photo on Instagram stories as well. The only thing that I've left to do is to sew in the ends, which you can maybe see. But yeah, so that was done. Anyway, let's get into the books. So the book that I've been reading for a while now and have honestly been it's been on the back burner for a bit over the last few weeks, and that is The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. I'm reading the short stories, one short story at a time, technically, with Amelia and Roxy. I will link both of them below. Amelia on Instagram and Roxy on YouTube and Instagram. But we're reading the Sherlock Holmes stories together as a buddy read, and it's been really fun. But we're closing in on The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. That should be finished in the next month, I think. So that is something I've been trying to catch up on because I've been slightly behind on that buddy read. The book that I am currently reading for Invisible Cities for Peru is The World of the Speechless, selected stories by Julio, Ramon, Ribeyro, and this is translated by Catherine Silver. This is a short story collection, and I've only read, I think, 3 stories. So far they've been good, but not anything completely stand out. I think I like the vibe of the stories, but so far I haven't been completely pulled in, so we'll see. But there's, I think, 19 stories in this collection, so a lot of time still to go and to get a sense of Ribeyro as an author. I think I will try to read 1 story per day to read this over the course of the rest of April. A fiction book that I'm currently reading for sort of related to Aussie April is The Enlightenment of the Greengage Tree by Shokoofeh Azad. Translator of this is anonymous, so but this is a book set around the cusp of the the Islamic Revolution in Iran, and I'm really enjoying this one so far. I've read about 40% of this so far, and it's got a magical realism tone to it. There's a lot of ghosts involved, a lot of violence as well. I've been really enjoying reading this one, especially when there's a fictionalized or Khomeini is one of the characters in this book, so I thought that was really interesting, and I'm enjoying the historical backdrop of the book, and the writing itself is also something I'm really enjoying so far. So we'll definitely talk more about this when I've finished it. I think I will easily finish this one before the end of the month. Another book that I've made about a third of the way through is Walking Through Fire, The Later Years of Namal El-Sadawi in Her Own Words, and this is translated by Cheryl. This is the author of Woman at Point Zero that I read in February. I ordered this one right after finishing Woman at Point Zero because I really liked her writing style, and I was interested in reading more of her nonfiction work to get a better sense of her as an author and her activism. She did a lot of work related to women's rights and sort of women's place in society and freedom. that kind of thing. And she was a really interesting woman. So this book, seemingly about the later years, but in fact it has been going back into her childhood years. A lot of the parts that I've read so far has been in part talking about the later part of her life when she has left Egypt to escape it because she has basically become a political refugee. But she also goes back in time to her childhood years and sort of how she was drawn into her studies and specifically medical studies. So it's been interesting to read this one, and I still think she's a fantastic writer, but it's not been quite what I was expecting it to be. Next we have a book I've made it to the halfway point, and that is Sätta, världen, rörelse by Anna-Karin Palm. This is a Swedish biography of Saadawi, who is basically an iconic women writer of Sweden, and she was active from the late 19th century until the early 20th century. But this one has been super fascinating and fun to read. It's looking back into her early years when she it sort of starts with her interest in becoming a writer and going back into her education and becoming a teacher and working as a teacher for a few years until her career as a writer took off and she became able to sustain her livelihood based on her work as a writer. And one of the things I'm finding really fun is the discussion around the reception of her work and how she was so often belittled as basically a fantasy or fairy tale writer and not so much of sort of commentary or being a skillful writer, that she wasn't, that anything that she did in her books was basically just her following sort of using folk tales and folk lore to tell stories and just recounting stories rather than being impressive in terms of the structure of them. She traveled the world with her female partner at the time, and there's a lot of things related to the historical context that I'm enjoying learning about, both in terms of sort of women's rights in different parts of the world and in Sweden, and the educational system of the time, the reception, as I said, of her books. It's been really fun, and I do really like the turn of the century time period, so that wasn't really a surprise, but there's a lot of details about her life that I didn't know anything about. Then we have the audiobook that I'm currently listening to. Basically I wanted to listen to a few audiobooks from my TBR, so books that I have on my physical TBR that I could listen to audiobooks to sort of work through my TBR at the same time as enjoying the audio format. So the one that I'm currently working my way through is The Valley at the Center of the World by Malachy, Tallack. This has been very enjoyable so far. I think I'll probably finish this audiobook either today or by the end of the week for sure. I don't really have that much left of it. It's set in a very rural place in Shetland, and it's about a man who moved there to live with his girlfriend at the time, and then 3 years later they split up, but he stays there, and it's a very tiny community. It's like, I think it's like five houses or something in their tiny community, and it's just about the lives of the people living there and about Sandy, who is the man I mentioned, and how he tries to make a life for himself there without his girlfriend Emma. It's just these individual characters, and they share a very small place in the world together and have sometimes complicated relationships with each other, but it's a very isolated and sort of far away place, and really enjoying the setting of it, which wasn't really unexpected, but also the quietness of the stories that are being told. So I'll talk more about this when I've finished it for sure. But I'm really enjoying the audiobook because it's told partly in accent or in dialect, and the funny thing about the dialect is that it's almost more Nordic than it is English. There's a lot of overlap, and I'm guessing that's because of a Viking background in further back in history. So that's been really interesting, especially in the audiobook where the dialect is especially apparent. Also, I'm sort of starting my new audiobook to take over for that one when I finish it. So I've only just started this audiobook, but that is The Otter's Tale by Simon Cooper, and this is a non-fiction book about otters, and specifically I think about this man who owns a house, and underneath the house I think there's an otter family who lives there. And so far from the beginning of this book, it seems like the otter is... there's like an individual otter character that this book is partly told from. And through getting to know this otter, you learn about otters' nature and their habitat and their behavior and that kind of thing. So far it's fun, but I haven't made much progress into this one yet. So I think I will finish this one off in the next day or so and then move on to this one on the audio. As you can tell, I'm reading some nature-related books, and that's because Springathon is coming up, and I've been having that on my mind and wanting to read a few books that I had planned to read last year. Haven't actually been reading that much nature nonfiction since November, for Nonfiction November. So it's just been on my mind because of planning for Springathon, and I wanted to get back to it and sort of get used to reading nature nonfiction again. The last two books that I have are books that I just started, so yesterday, for two different reasons. So first we have Luminaries by Eleanor Catton. I've just started this because I'm doing a buddy read with Lorraine. I will put her booktube channel link below, and we are starting this buddy read, and I'm very happy about it because I've had this on my shelf for a bit. But this is set in New Zealand, where a man moves there to dig for gold, I think. That is basically the gist of the story I know. 1866, and Walter Moody has come to make his fortune upon the New Zealand gold fields. So it's a historical fiction book. I haven't read a lot of those in the last few weeks or months. I don't know if I've read any historical fiction books this year. Aside from the Greengage tree, which is obviously historical fiction, but it's set in around the 70s and 80s, so it doesn't feel very historical to me. But either way, this has started good so far, but I have not made enough progress to have a proper feel of it yet. So this is one I will be reading for the next few weeks for sure. And then the last book is another one that, as I said, I just started and so far loving. And that is In Memory of Memory by Maria Stepanova, translated by Sasha Dugdale. The reason I wanted to read this now is in part because it's one of my most anticipated books releases of this year. And I've been putting it to the side, waiting for the time that I have to dedicate to it. But I just couldn't wait anymore because I've been seriously craving reading this one since it arrived in the mail. And another reason I wanted to get to it now is because it's one of the long-listed books for the Booker International this year. And I just, the rest of the books that I ordered from that long list just arrived yesterday, so I thought that I would start off with this one. This is a non-fiction book, as you can tell from the white cover, from the Fitzgeraldo editions, and it's about Maria Sepanova basically finding or digging into her family history, and so far is very sort of fluid. She goes back and forth in time, she goes from memory to memory, and so far it's pretty much exactly what I was hoping it to be, but I've only read 50 or so pages of it, and it's a chunky book. I think it's 400-ish pages. 500. So those are all of the books that I am currently reading, basically my pile of shame. As you can see, my mind has been all over the place, and that has been reflected in me not sustaining my attention to one single book, and sort of allowing myself to start new books is usually I try to control that urge to move on to a new thing. Whenever I'm drawn to a book, I try to push that feeling forward until I finish the book. But at the moment, as you can see, the situation is a bit ridiculous. I think I will try to focus on 1 or 2 books of these in the next few weeks and see if I can maybe finish a few books off so that the situation is more manageable going into May. We'll see. But we're halfway through April, so 2 weeks I have until Spring-a-thon arrives, and then I also want to do my North Korean reading for Invisible Cities. So I have 2 weeks to take care of this situation, and we'll see what happens. If you've read any of these books, I would love to hear what you thought of them, and if you have any suggestions on which books I should prioritize over others, or if you're interested in hearing my thoughts on any of these in particular, then I could definitely try to prioritize those books over the others. I would love to know what you're currently reading. If your currently reading pile is more manageable, I would love to hear about that. I hope you're having a good day, and I will talk to you soon.